A few days ago, on April 16th, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office published a patent application from Apple that revealed their invention relating to Z-depth and its application in Final Cut X. Now, this might not sound like the coolest thing, but Z-depth is actually, it's kind of a signal towards the way the industry is moving, more towards true 3D acquisition rather than just a two-dimensional plane. Now, this isn't full 3D like you would see in Pixar movies or DreamWorks movies where you're getting all the information from a scene and every angle and every possible focal length, but it would allow you to track the depth of a scene. So if you have an actor in the foreground, you would have the information to know what's in the background and what's in the foreground. You wouldn't be able to see behind things necessarily, but you would know the positioning relative to one another. And it's actually really cool because this would allow for truer 3D tracking and better compositing. Right now, the only way to really do it besides green screening is rotoscoping and perhaps some more advanced techniques using luminance levels and that kind of stuff. But if you were to actually have a true 3D information from the scene, you would be able to know what was in front of what, and you could place things into the scene without having to go through the time-consuming task of actually rotoscoping that stuff in and cutting out pieces of the image, essentially photoshopping the video. Now, there are only a few cameras that I'm aware of that have this technology built in. You have the Xbox Kinect that can sense, three-dimensional imagery, such as what's in the foreground and what's in the background. You have the cameras from Lytro that are light field cameras, and then there are a few webcams that kind of do 3D tracking. But this patent specifically applies to Final Cut X. And why that's interesting is because that's an Apple product and it's Apple owned. But Apple doesn't have any cameras currently that allow you to get that Z-depth pass. So people are speculating that potentially the new iPhone or a couple generations away that an iPhone will have some kind of light field camera. And I would expect that to be true. There have been recent statements from smartphone manufacturers basically saying that, over the next few years, they're going to be able to take professional DSLR photos with a smartphone. And if you know anything about the way camera sensors work, is essentially the reason people associate DSLRs with professional looking imagery is because they have much larger sensors. And that larger sensor allows you to get a shallower depth of field. The background's blurred out. And people associate that with high-end professional photos. And it's just not a physical practical use of a smartphone right now. You can't do that on a smartphone because the sensors are just too small. It's a matter of physics and what actually fits. And the bigger the sensor, the bigger the lens. But what's really cool about this Z-depth pass or this information from that depth channel is you can actually control your blur and your focus amount. So you can actually add that greater blur, that shallower depth of field to smartphone imagery, which there are a few apps that kind of do that right now because they take multiple photos and they can kind of figure out what's where. But being able to do that in one shot with having that information right off the camera sensor would be really powerful. People would be able to take those high-end professional looking photos with their smartphone. It's not going to be the exact same. You're still going to have things like raw processing, dynamic range, resolution, noise level, all that stuff. But it is one step closer in offering people who just like, snapping photos with their smartphone and uploading to Instagram, it gives them a little bit more control over their image. And what's really cool, especially for the professional people, is if this Z-depth information comes to higher end cameras, it would make visual effects and compositing way easier. Right now, that is a realm where it's pretty much reserved for the people who know After Effects or know Nuke, and they can get in there and do some of that advanced tracking. Whereas if you had this information directly from the camera, you could make really compelling, really believable composites in a fraction of the time, and it would be something as easy as just plugging it into the software. So I hope to see this stuff come, especially to Premiere and Media Composer and some of the other editing platforms. Right now you can kind of do it a little bit with After Effects, but you still need the Z-depth pass, which right now, there's not a lot of ways to get that. So hopefully over the next few years, this can be something added to cameras, and we'll see the industry shift towards using more 3D elements.